A peaceful suburban neighborhood, until one man's quiet life is shattered by the unjust actions of two racist cops. This is the story of Jonathan Blackwell, a black man who, while walking through his own property, gets wrongly accused by two officers of trespassing without any reason at all. But here's the twist. Jonathan isn't just anyone. He's the FBI director, and these officers have no idea who they're dealing with. Before we dive in, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more shocking stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The sound of the bell above the door rang as Kayla stepped into the store, the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee filling the air. It was a quiet morning, just before the midday rush, and she had come in for a few items: milk, eggs, some fruit. The store was nearly empty, save for the cashier and one other shopper. She didn't expect her life to change in the next few moments. Kayla walked to the produce aisle, her mind drifting to her busy day ahead. She was a single mother, juggling two jobs, trying to make ends meet. She wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't seeking any sort of conflict. She just wanted to get her things and go. That's when it happened. Officer Harrison stood in the aisle, his hand on his gun, his eyes fixed on her. He had been watching her since she entered, the look in his eyes unsettling. Kayla had done nothing wrong, but something about his gaze told her that the situation was about to escalate. She tried to brush it off, hoping it was just her nerves, but when she turned the corner into the dairy section, he followed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice laced with authority and something darker. "You're trespassing." Kayla froze. She didn't understand. She was a regular at the store, and she hadn't even gone into any restricted areas. She quickly turned to face him, but his hand never left his gun. "I don't know what you mean," she said cautiously, her voice steady. "I'm just here to shop." But Harrison's expression hardened. He stepped closer, his bulk towering over her. "I said you're trespassing," he repeated, his tone sharp, "and I think you need to leave now." Kayla's heart pounded, confusion clouding her thoughts. "I haven't done anything wrong," she replied, trying to maintain composure. She glanced around for help, but the few people in the store were too afraid to intervene. The clerk behind the counter had already turned his back, pretending not to notice. Harrison took another step forward, his eyes narrowing as he grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he warned. Kayla's pulse quickened as panic set in. She hadn't done anything to deserve this treatment. Her mind raced for options, but she was trapped. The officer's grip on her tightened, and as she tried to pull away, his hand jerked her toward the door. "What are you doing? Let go!" Kayla shouted, her voice filled with fear and confusion. She was being dragged toward the exit, and she couldn't understand why. She hadn't even had a chance to defend herself, but Harrison's hand tightened around her arm, his grip unyielding. "Come with me now," he barked, ignoring her protests. As they reached the door, Kayla tried to break free, but the officer was much stronger. His hand gripped her wrist tightly, pulling her through the store as she struggled. She could hear the faint sound of her heart pounding in her ears, but she knew if she didn't fight back, she would be dragged out and humiliated in front of everyone. Just then, a familiar face appeared in the doorway of the store. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her father, Special Agent Marcus Richards, FBI. He had just finished his shift and was walking past the store when he saw the scene unfold. Without hesitation, he entered, his eyes scanning the situation. "Officer," he called, his voice calm but firm. "Let her go." Harrison froze for a moment, then turned slowly. His eyes narrowed when he saw Marcus in his FBI uniform. "This doesn't concern you," he growled, clearly irritated, but Marcus wasn't intimidated. He was a seasoned agent, and he knew exactly how to handle situations like this. Kayla's heart raced as she looked at her father. She knew he was the only one who could save her. The officer's grip on her arm loosened slightly, as Marcus took another step forward. "This is my daughter," Marcus said, his voice steady, the authority clear. "You've made a mistake." Harrison's gaze flicked to Marcus, and a flash of realization crossed his face. But it was too late. Marcus was already reaching for his badge, and with one swift motion he flashed it at the officer. "Let go of her, now." The power in Marcus's voice was undeniable. Harrison's hand dropped from Kayla's wrist, and the tension in the store thickened. The air felt still, charged with a dangerous energy. Kayla stood there, still reeling from the confrontation. The officer stepped back, his expression now filled with an uncomfortable mixture of fear and anger. He hadn't expected Marcus to show up, but what he didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just any officer. He was someone who knew exactly how to bring justice to situations like this. Marcus turned to his daughter, concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Kayla nodded, though her heart was still racing. The store was quiet now, the tension slowly dissipating, but the fear lingered. Harrison stood there for a moment, seething with rage, his face red. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice low and threatening. Marcus didn't flinch. He had heard threats like that before. "No, officer," he said calmly. "You're the one who's going to regret this." Marcus stood firm, his eyes never leaving Officer Harrison's. The air in the store felt thick, as if every breath carried the weight of unspoken tension. The few remaining shoppers in the store had frozen in place, unsure of what to do, but the presence of an FBI agent gave them pause. Harrison, now visibly shaken by the authority Marcus had commanded, took a step back. He knew he had pushed his luck too far, and his intimidation tactics had backfired. He had underestimated Marcus, assuming that his badge would shield him from any repercussions. But now, with the tables turned, his bravado crumbled. He couldn't speak, his throat felt dry, his jaw clenched. He had never been in a situation like this before. Marcus remained calm, yet the anger inside him was palpable. This wasn't just about his daughter. It was about the blatant racism and power abuse that continued to spread like a virus, infecting the very systems meant to protect people. He could feel his heartbeat steadying as he took control of the situation. "You're lucky this time," Marcus said, his voice low and deliberate. "But don't think for a second that this is over." Harrison took one last look at Marcus, his pride wounded, before he stormed out of the store. He didn't say another word, but the contempt in his eyes spoke volumes. The moment he stepped out, the store seemed to breathe again, the tension dissipating as quickly as it had arrived. But for Kayla, it wasn't over. The memory of being grabbed, of the helplessness, would haunt her long after the incident. "Are you okay, Kayla?" Marcus asked, his voice softening as he turned to his daughter. He approached her carefully, the concern in his eyes deepening. Kayla looked at her father, still trying to process everything. "I'm fine, Dad. Just shaken up." That was terrifying. Marcus nodded. He could see the toll it had taken on her. His heart ached, knowing how many times he had warned her about the dangers of being black in this world, how many times he had wished to shield her from the ugliness that still existed. But moments like this, when the ugly reality of systemic racism reared its head, shook him to his core. "We'll go home, okay?" Marcus said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to deal with this anymore." But as they made their way to the door, the reality of the situation began to settle. There was something much larger at play here, something that neither Marcus nor Kayla had anticipated. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a flashpoint. A few hours later, the phone rang. Marcus answered it on the first ring, recognizing the number immediately. "Agent Richards," a voice on the other end of the line said. "We need to talk." It was his supervisor, Agent Martinez, his voice tight with urgency. "There's a situation brewing. You need to come in." Marcus's brow furrowed, his instincts kicking into overdrive. "What's going on?" "It's Harrison. He's making claims that you're threatening him, that you used your position to intimidate him. The department's already in damage control mode. They want you to come in." Marcus's jaw tightened. He could feel the storm approaching, and it was going to hit hard. Harrison was going to make sure that Marcus paid for his interference. "I didn't do anything wrong. He's the one who needs to be held accountable." "I know," Martinez replied, his voice even. "But you know how it goes. We need to clear your name before this spirals out of control." Marcus's mind raced. It was clear that Harrison wasn't going to let this go. He had already shown his true colors, and now he was fighting back, trying to use his position to get revenge. But Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. Not to him, not to his family, and certainly not to Kayla. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, Marcus said, his resolve hardening. "Get the paperwork ready." As Marcus hung up, Kayla entered the room, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked at her and gave a small sigh. "It's not over yet, Kayla. We have to be ready for what's coming." Kayla nodded, the weight of the situation settling in her chest. She had hoped this would end with Harrison walking away, his pride bruised but not broken. But Marcus had just revealed that there was more to it than that. This wasn't just a one-time altercation. It was the beginning of a much larger battle. At the police station, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus entered the building with purpose, his uniform sharp and crisp, his gaze unwavering. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual, the air thick with unspoken accusations, and the weight of a system that wasn't built to protect those like him. Inside, he was greeted by Agent Martinez and a few others from Internal Affairs. They led him into an interrogation room, the sterile lighting above casting harsh shadows on the table. "Sit down, Agent Richards," Martinez said, his voice professional but lacking warmth. "We need to figure out how to handle this." Marcus sat down, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" Officer Harrison has already filed a complaint against you, Martinez explained, sliding a folder across the table. He's claiming you used your authority to intimidate him, that you threatened him in front of witnesses. You understand how serious this is, right? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind calculating the best way to navigate this. He wasn't afraid of the truth, but the system was designed to protect its own, and in this case, the system had already decided who the victim was. I'm not going to lie, Marcus said, his tone cold. I told Harrison to let my daughter go. He was harassing her for no reason, but I didn't threaten him. I didn't intimidate him. I just told him to do his job and leave her alone. Martinez nodded, scribbling something in his notes. We'll need to investigate. We have to follow procedure, but I need you to know, this could escalate quickly. Harrison's connected, and he has the backing of people in higher places. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. He had already fought for justice in countless situations, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just about him, it was about the whole system, and he was ready to bring it all down if it meant protecting his family. Do what you have to do, Marcus said, standing up, but I'm not backing down. As the days passed, the situation surrounding Jonathan Blackwell only intensified. He had expected some fallout after the public exposure of the corrupt officers in Crestwood, but the backlash from the police and certain powerful figures was quick and brutal. The media had picked up the story, with most of the coverage centered around the FBI director's confrontation with the racist officers. The accusations against the police were damning, clear evidence of racial profiling, abuse of power, and attempts to intimidate Jonathan. But what followed next was more disturbing than Jonathan had imagined. He had anticipated that Mason and his gang would fight back, but the degree to which they did was shocking. Back at FBI headquarters, Jonathan was working overtime, poring over evidence with his most trusted agents. They had just uncovered a new lead, a financial connection between some of the arrested officers and a corrupt business empire operating under the radar. But even as they prepared to strike again, a new threat emerged. Sir, Agent Simmons interrupted, walking briskly into the office. We've got a problem. Harrison and his group aren't done. They've reached out to certain political allies, and the pressure on us is building. The mayor's office is getting involved, and they're trying to stall the investigation. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He had suspected this would happen. Corruption ran deep in this case, and the network was vast. His mind raced with strategies, trying to figure out how to counter the moves that were being made against him. Who's backing them? Jonathan asked, his voice calm despite the rising tension in his chest. Simmons flipped through his notes, then looked up. The mayor's office, some state-level representatives, and even a few high-ranking officials inside the justice system, they're pushing to have the case dismissed, citing procedural errors. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, a grim look on his face. He had fought against systemic corruption before, but this felt different. The stakes were much higher, and now he had to protect not only the investigation, but also his reputation. We need to be ready, Jonathan said, standing up and pacing. Get me a list of everyone involved. We can't let them sweep this under the rug. If they think they can stop us, they've got another thing coming. That night, as Jonathan sat in his office, the weight of the situation bore down on him. He had been trained for moments like these, but nothing could have prepared him for the full extent of the fight he was about to enter. His phone buzzed with a new message. Watch your back, they're closing in. The message was cryptic, but the meaning was clear. Someone was trying to warn him. Jonathan's hand gripped the phone as he read the message again. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Who could it be? He immediately dialed Simmons' number. Simmons, I need you to track the source of this message. I don't care how you do it. Just find out who's trying to warn me. Got it, Director, Simmons replied, his voice confident but filled with urgency. We'll get back to you in a few minutes. Just as the clock struck midnight, Jonathan's phone rang again. It was Simmons. Sir, I've got a name. It's someone inside the department. Someone you know. They're trying to help, but they're scared of the consequences. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. Who is it? Simmons hesitated for a moment. It's Agent Richards, the officer from the precinct. He's been feeding us information. He says there's someone higher up who's been involved in covering for Mason and the others. He's willing to testify. Jonathan's mind raced. Agent Richards was someone he had trusted for years, but the idea that he could have been compromised, or worse, working with the enemy, hit him like a punch to the gut. I'll meet him tomorrow, Jonathan said, his voice firm. We need to get to the bottom of this. The following morning, Jonathan arrived at the rendezvous point, a small, secluded diner on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place he usually met informants, but given the circumstances, it seemed like the safest option. He walked inside, scanning the room. It was early and the place was mostly empty. He spotted Richards sitting in a corner booth, looking tense but determined. Jonathan made his way over, sliding into the seat across from him. "Richards," Jonathan said, his voice low, "you've been feeding us information. What's going on? What's the real story?" Richards glanced around nervously before speaking. "Director Blackwell, I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. I've been working undercover gathering intel. Mason's group isn't just some rogue officers. They're part of a larger operation. They've got people in key positions, both within law enforcement and in the business world, and they're trying to shut you down, sir." Jonathan's mind raced. The scale of the conspiracy was larger than he had imagined. How deep does it go? Who's involved? Richards leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It goes to the top. There are people within your own department, sir. People who have been covering for Mason. They're scared of what will happen when the truth comes out. They'll do anything to stop you." Jonathan's eyes hardened. He knew what had to be done. This wasn't just about cleaning up the precinct. This was about taking down an entire network, one that had infected the system for far too long. "I need you to help me bring them down," Jonathan said, his voice steady and commanding. Richards nodded. "I'm with you, sir. We'll expose them all." As the day progressed, Jonathan and Richards made plans to launch a coordinated attack. They would gather enough evidence to take down every officer involved and expose the corrupt officials hiding behind their badges. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The stakes were higher now, and the danger was real. He was getting closer to uncovering the full scope of the conspiracy, but there was one thing he knew for sure. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it would become. The pressure inside FBI headquarters was palpable. Jonathan could feel the weight of his decisions bearing down on him as he sat in his office, scanning over the intel Richards had gathered. The deeper they went, the more intricate the web of corruption seemed. They weren't just dealing with a handful of rogue officers anymore. This was an organized effort that had reached into the very core of the justice system. As the evening wore on, the phone rang again. This time, it was Simmons. "We've got a problem," Simmons said, his voice urgent. "Harrison's crew isn't taking this sitting down. We've intercepted communications, and they're making moves to retaliate. They're trying to silence anyone who stands in their way." Jonathan's heart rate quickened. "What do you mean by silence?" "They've already started threatening the officers who testified. A few witnesses have gone missing, and we're getting word that some of our own agents may be compromised." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I won't let them scare us. We need to move forward now. We can't give them a chance to regroup." Simmons hesitated. "There's something else. Harrison's been in contact with someone high up in the department, someone with enough influence to stop this investigation. We don't know who it is yet, but we need to find out before they pull the strings any tighter." Jonathan rubbed his temples. The situation was becoming far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about Mason and his group anymore. The entire system was at risk. "Find out who's pulling the strings," Jonathan said, his voice resolute, "and get to those witnesses. We can't afford any more slip-ups." As the night grew darker, Jonathan found himself in a war room with Simmons, Richards, and a few of his most trusted agents. The atmosphere was thick with tension as they pored over maps, files, and encrypted communications. "We need to put pressure on every lead we've got," Jonathan said, his voice commanding. "No more waiting. If Harrison and his people are trying to make a move, we need to be 5 steps ahead." The team got to work, splitting up into smaller groups to track down the compromised agents, investigate the missing witnesses, and uncover the identity of the person behind the scenes trying to sabotage their progress. Jonathan could feel the weight of the situation. Every move they made now could change the course of the investigation. As the hours passed, Simmons returned to the room, his face grave. "We've got something," he said, holding up a file. "It's not much, but it's a start. We've tracked down one of the missing witnesses. He's been hiding out at a safe house in the city. We'll need to get to him before Harrison's people do." Jonathan nodded. "Let's move. We can't afford to waste any more time." The safe house was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Jonathan, Simmons, and a small team of agents arrived in the early hours of the morning, their vehicles parked discreetly on the street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the houses dark and still. They approached the house cautiously, their steps muffled by the soft hum of the city that seemed to hold its breath. As they reached the door, Jonathan signaled for Simmons to take the lead. He knocked 3 times, firm but not aggressive, and waited. The door creaked open, revealing a thin man with a nervous look in his eyes. His hands shook slightly as he opened the door wider. "You the ones looking for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are," Jonathan said, his voice low but steady. "We need to talk." The man stepped back, motioning them inside. "I didn't want to get involved, but things have been getting real messy. Harrison, he's dangerous. I've seen things I can't ignore anymore." Jonathan and Simmons exchanged a glance. This was the break they needed. Inside the house, the man, whose name was David, sat them down and began to speak. His voice trembled as he recounted the events he had witnessed. He described how Harrison's crew had been running illegal operations, bribing local officials, and using their positions to intimidate anyone who crossed them. But most disturbingly, he spoke of a hidden agenda, one that had been brewing for years. They were planning something big, David whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Something that could bring the whole city to its knees. But I don't know what it was. Jonathan leaned forward. Tell me everything you know. We don't have time to waste. David's eyes widened, and he took a deep breath. They've got connections. People in the highest offices, in the police, even the city government. But they've been hiding something that's going to shake everything up. I don't know all the details, but it's bigger than Mason. It's a plan to seize control. Simmons looked at Jonathan, his face grim. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. The conspiracy wasn't just about a few bad officers. This was a coordinated effort to take control of the city, and it wasn't going to stop with Mason. As Jonathan and his team prepared to leave the safe house, a loud noise echoed in the distance, gunshots. They exchanged alarmed looks, realizing they weren't alone. Get down, Jonathan shouted as he pulled David behind the couch, motioning for Simmons and the other agents to take cover. The gunfire grew closer, and Jonathan's mind raced. Harrison and his people had found them. There was no time to waste. Move out, Jonathan ordered. Get to the cars now. With one last look at David, Jonathan ran toward the door, his heart pounding as he heard the approaching footsteps of their enemies. The battle was only just beginning. The gunshots rang out like thunder, loud and terrifying. Jonathan ducked behind a nearby car as the sound of footsteps grew louder. They were closing in. Harrison's crew had found them. The safe house, once a refuge, was now a battleground. Jonathan's heart raced, and his training kicked in. He wasn't just the FBI director. He was a soldier, a strategist, and he knew how to fight back. Take cover, Jonathan yelled to Simmons, who was crouched beside him. The other agents were already positioning themselves, guns drawn, waiting for the right moment. They had to move quickly or they would be trapped. But before they could make a move, the sound of a vehicle engine echoed through the street, growing louder by the second. Jonathan's mind raced, trying to assess the situation. They were surrounded. There was no clear escape route. Then suddenly, the car screeched to a halt just outside the safe house, and a voice shouted from inside the vehicle, "We've got a hit. The safe house is compromised." It was a man's voice, one that Jonathan didn't recognize, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. The backup had arrived. But who were these people? Jonathan signaled for his team to hold their position. His instincts told him that this was the moment of truth, the moment when the storm would break, and the stakes would go higher than ever before. As the backup team rushed toward the door of the safe house, gunfire erupted from the other side of the street. The battle had begun in earnest, and there was no going back. Jonathan's pulse quickened, and he motioned for Simmons to move out. "We have to get to the files," Jonathan shouted. "Secure the evidence and get it to the bureau. Now." Simmons nodded, understanding immediately. The evidence from the operation was crucial to the case, and without it, all their hard work would have been for nothing. The files contained everything they needed to expose the corruption at the highest levels. They couldn't afford to let the enemy get their hands on them. Jonathan and his team charged forward, taking cover as they made their way toward the rear of the house. The gunfire from Harrison's crew continued to rain down around them, but they were focused. Every movement was deliberate, every step calculated. They had to get to the files before they lost their chance. Inside the safe house, chaos erupted. Richards, the witness who had risked everything to testify, was pinned down behind a stack of crates. He was fighting back, firing at the advancing enemies, but Jonathan could see the fear in his eyes. Richards wasn't trained for this kind of combat. He was in way over his head. Jonathan signaled for one of his agents to cover Richards while he moved toward the storage room where the evidence was kept. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle. Time seemed to slow down, the air thick with tension. The lives of everyone involved in this case, his daughter, his team, the countless victims of corruption were riding on this moment. "Let's go," Jonathan shouted, and his team rushed inside with him. The storage room was a mess. Papers and files scattered across the floor, boxes half-packed. Jonathan quickly scanned the room, his eyes landing on the large safe in the corner. He moved toward it, his fingers working rapidly as he keyed in the code. The safe clicked open, and Jonathan pulled out the stack of documents that would bring down the entire corrupt operation. The files were thick, each one containing the names of officers, politicians, and businessmen who had been colluding with Mason and his crew. "Got it," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "Let's move." But as they turned to leave, the door to the room slammed open. Two men wearing black tactical gear burst in, guns aimed at Jonathan and his team. "Drop the files," one of them shouted. The other man, his eyes cold and calculating, took a step forward, his weapon trained on Jonathan. Jonathan's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. He knew what had to be done. They couldn't afford to lose the evidence now. There was no way they could back down. Without hesitation, Jonathan dove to the side, rolling behind a desk for cover. The agents followed suit, but the two assailants were fast. Bullets whizzed past Jonathan's head as he peeked out from behind cover, his finger tightening on the trigger of his own gun. "Stay down," Jonathan yelled to Simmons, who was already firing back at the intruders. The gunfire echoed through the room, and Jonathan could feel the tension mounting. He was in the middle of a battle, a fight for justice, for his team, and for the future of this investigation. The moment was intense. Every second counted. "Richards," Jonathan shouted, "get to the backup team, now." Richards hesitated, but Jonathan's command was clear. Richards sprinted toward the back exit, determined to get to safety. He knew that without the evidence, their case was dead. With the files in his hand, Jonathan made his move, rushing toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He spun around, just in time to see the second assailant lunging toward him. There was no time to react. The fight that ensued was quick but brutal. Jonathan's training kicked in, and he disarmed the man with swift precision, using his body weight to take the assailant down. But just as he thought he had the upper hand, a shot rang out from the hallway. Simmons was down.